Absolute worst jobs in history.
The worst jobs in history. If you ever think your job's crappy, try having to plunge into a pit of literal human doo-doo feces every single night. Way back in the day in good old England, some daring men made a career out of wading through human excrement. So-called gong farmers were tasked with draining out cesspits filled to the brim with offensive butt slop. The profession had existed for centuries, but it saw its height between the years of 1485 and 1603, also known as the Tudor period. Oi, I got a tutor for you.
Man, thank God for plumbing, man. Thank God for our sewer system that we have these days. Because if not for those things, these kind of jobs would still exist in a wide array. Like people would still be having these jobs. Like a lot of people would still be having these jobs if it wasn't for the sewer systems that we have today. So just, thank God for where we are today, because I don't think anybody would be happy doing something like this. There's probably people out there in some places who don't have access to the sewer systems that we have today, so they still have to do stuff like this. And to those people, I just feel sorry for them, man. Hopefully they'll get sewer systems sooner rather than later.
Since this was way before the invention of the turlet, people were content with just slamming their cheeks down in a public latrine to pinch off a quick loaf. The other problem was the lack of availability of somewhere to go. Towards the end of the 14th century, it's estimated that there was only one public bathroom per 2,000 people. Plus, keep in mind that all of that human waste was just piling up in a literal stone-lined hole in the ground, so you were just dropping logs onto a mountain of timber. The local government, realizing that this horrid threat to public health was fermenting beneath everyone's feet, took action to allow the construction of private outhouses and latrines in residential areas, as a way to disperse the smelly sewage. It didn't work all that well. So with dookie levels rising, help was needed to drain the pits. Enter the gong farmer. The term gong deriving from an Old English term meaning to go. They were also referred to as the much more mysterious and cooler sounding title of nightmen, as the only time that they were allowed to perform their duties was under the shroud of night, and that really sucked. There were no flashlights, spotlights, or illumination of any kind. You just had to hope that the moon was shining brightly to light your way through the filth. The nightmen would enter these cesspits and drain the contents using buckets and shovels. Excrement was loaded into barrels and carted off to be dumped near the River Thames. Don't worry, it was used as fertilizer later. Maybe. These men would be knee-deep, waist-deep, even neck-deep in the stuff, which had its own risks, the first and foremost being asphyxiation. Cesspits were often enclosed spaces with little to no ventilation, so the buildup of noxious and toxic gases.
The life expectancy for these guys must have been mad short, because you would get sick on the regular doing a disgusting job like this, man. Ugh.
Was a very real threat. Although rare, a gong farmer could pass out from a lack of fresh air and drown in the waste. Another risk was poor maintenance. Cesspits were typically drained as needed, which, depending on the size of the thing, could be up to 2 years between sloppy scoops. Since these pits just sat there and rotted, it was common for stone walls to collapse in on the farmers while they harvested their crops. Any scrapes or bumps would certainly get infected, which could only lead to a painful death. But these high risks were met with high reward. Since the job was less than desirable, gong farmers made quite a healthy living, about 6 pence a day. Now, I'm not quite sure what that is in non-silly sounding money, but sounds pretty good. Problem is though, gong farmers perpetually reeked from their labors and were only permitted to live in certain areas of the city, with most of the public actively avoiding them and, well, treating them like crap. Now, if you're looking for a soul-crushing, body-breaking job that pays next to nothing, you're an idiot. But I could recommend that you apply for the occupation of chimney sweep. These services were all the rage in, you guessed it, England's Tudor period. But the job has existed for hundreds of years. Rapid urbanization led to the construction of a lot of buildings, and each one of them suckers needs a source of heat. You gotta keep them English toesies nice and warm during the miserable grey winter months until the arrival of the miserable grey summer months. So a lot of fireplaces and chimneys were built to meet that demand. You do know how a fireplace works, right? Make fire, fire make heat and smoke go up through chimney and blow out the top. But All of that burning of wood and coal creates lots of icky carbon-heavy flammable deposits that build up within the chimney. Big problem, cause if that's not properly cleared out, then things can just go. And there goes not only your house, but a few neighbors' houses as collateral damage. Well, the higher-ups didn't like the risk of their kingdom going up in smoke at any given time, so they mandated that chimneys must be swept at least 4 times a year or face heavy fines. Thus, the employment of chimney sweeps became critical. The problem, though, is that chimneys at the time weren't exactly designed for human entry and cleaning. Bugger. Most flue networks in the building were grouped together on the roof, but could have sharp turns as they angled out towards their respective fireplaces or furnaces. To make matters even worse, regulations shrunk flue sizes down to as little as 9 by 9 inches. This made it nearly impossible for full-grown men to slip through the cracks. The solution?
I don't like where this is going. If you're thinking what I'm thinking, you know that it's about to take a really dark turn. A very, very dark turn. I don't like where this is going. Not at all. Not one bit. Brace yourselves.
Children. Really young children. Adorable wide-eyed orphans were yoinked from poor houses and taken on as apprentices called climbing boys, with opportunities to one day grow into master sweepers themselves, if they lived that long. If it wasn't obvious, chimney sweeping was extremely dangerous, especially for the little limber lads. Boys as young as 6 years old were sent up chimneys and told to get scrubbing. The physical dangers were abundant, as several children had died from getting stuck or horribly burned from scaling the scalding bricks. Keep in mind that these fireplaces were almost always in use, so those chimneys were hot and ready like a carry-out pizza. Now if the cramming didn't kill you, the scrubbing would. Soot and creosote, the organic carbonaceous byproducts of burning wood and coal, are carcinogenic. So if you're trapped in a confined space just scrub-a-dub-dubbing away while sucking up hits of cancer-causing black powder all day day, things are not going to turn out well for you. But it actually wasn't your lungs that you needed to worry about. No, it was your balls. Scrotal squamous cell carcinoma, also known as chimney sweeps carcinoma or just straight up scrotal cancer, was a death sentence. Something I didn't mention until now was that the young children, as a way to fit easier into the narrow hot chimneys, often went commando. No shirt, no shoes, no pants, but all service. The constant exposure to soot and such led to the development of tumors on their nethers. Once developed, they were lucky if they had a few years left in them. Sure, your sack is out of whack, but damn, that chimney's clean. You've probably heard of the Radium Girls, young women of the workforce that would paint luminous numbers and hands onto timepieces in the early 1900s. Well, this is similar. Towards the end of the 19th century, matchmaking was a pretty lucrative business. Not like pairing couples up, but making literal matches. By the late 1800s, there were about 25 matchmaking factories across Great Britain, employing over 4,000 chaps and chapettes. The process, as with most industries,
Yeah, Britain does not have a good reputation for jobs, man. Most of the jobs they had back in the day available for people to have were just absolutely horrible, man. Because so far, every single job on this list has been like from Great Britain. So, like, what's going on in Britain? Britain back in the day was a nightmare to find a job in because these jobs sound like literal nightmares.
at the time involved working with some nasty chemicals. The flavor of the day here was white phosphorus, an unstable compound that burned fiercely when ignited. You know, perfect for the few seconds that you would need to set something ablaze. On top of being both easily ignitable and violently reactive with oxygen, it had the triple whammy of also being extremely toxic. Of all matchmaking jobs, roughly half were involved in the direct handling of white phosphorus, with over 80% of the phosphorus fingerers being young women. These women would come to be known as matchstick girls. Day in and day out, these women were tasked with packaging the dipped matchsticks, with an entire workforce handling as many as 10 million across a 10-hour shift, meeting the demand of the 250 million matches being burned in Britain every single day. Remember that fire is what got people through the day. Need to cook? Fire. Need to keep warm? Fire. Need to see in the dark? Fire. Need to shrink your overhead? Fire. It was the biggest blessing humanity has ever discovered, and you can now summon it out of a little box in your pocket. The obvious problem is that fiddling with all of those fickle phosphorus fumes physically fucked you up. It was very common for both men and women to form phosphoric necrosis of the jaw. The condition, nicknamed Phossy jaw, developed after the long-term exposure to phosphorus fumes. Initial symptoms included simple toothaches, which evolved into complete tooth loss, abscesses, swelling of the gums, and complete necrosis of the jaw. To put it simply, your jaw rotted off. If you did get the jaw rot, there was about a 1 in 5 chance that the rest of your body would be rotting not long after from contracting an even worse condition known as death. In 1888, over 1,400 matchstick girls, fed up with this blatant disregard for their safety, decided to strike, demanding better pay, working conditions, and abolition of unfair fines and penalties. The strike lasted for 2 weeks before demands were met and accepted. 20 years later, in 1908, the British
Okay, I got a question for you guys watching. Would you guys do any of these jobs if the pay that they were offering you was good enough? Let's say they offered you 200K to do, let's say, be a gong farmer. Would you do it? Like, let me know down in the comments.
House of Commons completely banned the use of toxic white phosphorus in favor of the much safer and less toxic red phosphorus, which is what we use in matches today, but not in the match head, on the striking pad. So remember to light one up for the matchstick girls. If you think your job's exhausting, try hauling an entire freaking ship up a river with your bros. These are burlaks, or barge haulers. They hauled barges. Typically dirt poor peasants just looking for enough coin to eat for a week, these men were tasked with strapping on a strap and using whatever strength they had left in them to pull in ships from the Caspian Sea all the way up the Volga River in the days of the Russian Empire. Since ship traffic was near constant thanks to strong trade, burlaks were in high demand to carefully guide the vessels up the Volga. But why couldn't the ships just sail up the river, you might ask? Because the Volga flows outward towards the Caspian Sea, and there were rarely favorable winds to propel a ship up the river, lest you risk beaching your entire ship on the banks. So why not hire a bunch of exhausted and desperate poor people to do the work instead? Whoa, slow down fellas, there's no need for us to be Russian. Depending on the load size, burlak groups could range from just a few men up to 150 fellas pulling a single ship. But there was a moment of respite for these workers. See, one advantage to working in the Russian Empire was the cold winters. Can't exactly move ships upstream when the waterways are completely frozen over. So burlaks were seasonal, working dawn until dusk, thaw till frost. But since the combination of being poor and not working meant certain death, the men would pick up odd jobs in the winter to barely scrape by.
Hey,
This one doesn't sound all too bad though. It's not that crazy. At least you have company, like with all the other guys helping you haul the ship out of the sea. It doesn't sound too bad, honestly.
like a duck. Smudge.
At the beginning of the 19th century, it is estimated that about 600,000 burlaks worked in the Russian Empire, but the evolution of ship technology and the invention of the steam-powered ship rendered the job obsolete. By the end of the 19th century, the burlak profession had vanished over the horizon. Now I know what you're thinking, so stop it. This has nothing to do with milking your own snake or giving little pinches to little snake nips, which don't exist. Snakes aren't mammals. The job of a snake milker was to extract their venom from their fangs. He looks cute, right? Think again. Snake venom was
These still exist today though. Like, I know that these still exist because snake venom is used in research to figure out the cure to different illnesses and stuff like that. These still exist today, but they're most likely more like, what you may call it, like more streamlined. The process of extracting the venom is way more safe, definitely, these days than they were back in the day, or than they were in the time period that chat history is about to tell us about.
highly coveted for use in early warfare as a biological weapon, granting you the ability to proc tick damage over time to your enemies if you weren't able to finish them off yourself. Perhaps the best weapons of choice to get slathered in the stuff were arrows. Lethality of arrows varied greatly. Take one in the skull? Yeah, sure, you're dead as a doornail. But take one in a less...
I guess the purposes for extracting venom have definitely changed over the years, because why we extract venom these days is not for those reasons.
critical spot like an arm or a leg, assuming you don't sever an artery, and you might just live to see another day. But that all goes out the window if the arrow tip was dipped in some venomous drip. Quite a few civilizations have been noted for using envenomed or poisoned arrows throughout history. You've got the Khoisan people of southern Africa who have been using poisoned arrows for thousands of years in hunting large prey, and the Harmatilians who used viper venom against an invading Alexander the Great. But no army employed the use of snake venom better than the Scythians. Also duking it out against Alexander the Great, the Scythians developed their own iconic poison for warfare. Combining not only viper venom, but also putrefied human blood and excrement, even minor scrapes from their weapons were lethal. So on top of dealing with being envenomed, you also dealt with the horrors of gangrene and tetanus. So with all that said and done, yeah, snake milkers. Like I said, it was their job to wrangle and wrestle up enough snakes to meet the demand of entire armies. But luckily, this wasn't a time for catch and release practices. Kill the snakes, take their venom. That's the job. Of course, that is easier said than done. By nature, snakes are
These days, though, I'm pretty sure they don't kill the snakes anymore, thankfully. Like, we don't want to have these guys going extinct out here just because we want their venom. Like, bro, we're already doing enough by, like, squeezing the hell out of their head to extract their venom. So, I think it's only fair we let them live.
shy little fellas and pretty hard to find. Chances are you get struck before you even noticed one. One catch of their fangs is enough for it to be game over. Snake milkers were considered lucky if they even managed to survive a single round of collecting. I think it's time for a quick science lesson. Venoms can be sorted into three main types: neurotoxic, hemotoxic, cytotoxic, yikes. Neurotoxins strike and destroy all your nerves. You're agonized and paralyzed, as you can observe. Hemotoxins target all your healthy blood, thinning down or clotting up, so now you're done for, bud. Cytotoxins focus on killing all your cells, so you can probably guess that you won't be doing well. Just avoid snakes, and you'll be doing fine. I know you fellas and fellettes just love a good rhyme. So to close this chapter out, yes, snake milkers still exist nowadays, though only for medical research and developing antivenom rather than biological warfare. Or so we think. Imagine getting ready to charge onto a battlefield to either invade a country or defend your own. You see your fellow soldiers gearing up for battle with their trusty firearms, and you're given a drum. Ugh. I gotta fight. Drummers, believe it or not, were a critical part of warfare in the days of yore. Since there were no such things as radios or more instantaneous methods of communication, drummer boys were employed and trained to maintain order on the battlefield, signaling commands, attacks, retreats, and everything in between. Peaking in popularity during the American Civil War, drummer boys were typically in their teenage years or young adulthood, though some more famous drummer boys were much younger. Little Charlie King of the Union Army died in battle at the age of just 13, being the youngest casualty in the Battle of Antietam. Itty Bitty Johnny Clem ran away from home and was taken in by the Union Army as a drummer boy at the ripe old age of 9. Just a few years later, the little fella fought in the Battle of Chickamauga in 1863 at the age of 12, where he shot and killed a Confederate soldier. What you gonna do? Shoot? He was promoted to sergeant, eventually retiring from the United States Army in 1915 as a brigadier general. But that's a rare occurrence. In reality, it would have gone more like this. Despite what people may think, drummer boys did not lead troops into battle. That would be stupid. Instead, they would relay commands from behind soldier lines, though they were still known to be valuable targets. If you break the communication line, you break down the army. Outside of combat, drummer boys had a wealth of other responsibilities, such as carrying messages between units, assisting battlefield surgeons with amputations, carting the wounded off the field, fetching supplies, or burying the dead. They very rarely carried weapons of their own, so if they had to defend themselves in the heat of battle, they were pretty shit out of luck. If you wanted to be one of the most influential people in all of England but don't have a drop of royal blood in you, you'd want to squeeze into the role of the groom of the stool, a job requiring you to get up real close and personal with the king or queen at the time. Look, we all have to go once or 12 times a day, so someone as prestigious and important as the king is gonna need help doing so. I mean, imagine feeling the sudden urge to blow out your britches, but you have to fight through said bridges to accomplish the mission. Grooms of the Stool assisted the monarch with any labors regarding biological movements. This included helping the removal of clothing, preparation of the lavish and luxurious royal ship box, and the removal of the splendiferous solids, but not before their proper examination. Yeah, that's right. Grooms of the Stool were not only tasked with cleaning up the royal slurry, but making sure that the passings were healthy, taking notes of any abnormalities in appearance or frequency. These notes would be passed on to the king's personal physician to diagnose any possible ailments. Well, that's not very helpful, is it? After the log was sent down the river, the Groom of the Stool would also assist in the cleanup effort, either by handing the king his own personal cleaning cloth, or by taking up wiping duties themselves. Now you might think that this
Oh, hell no. And of course, it would have been King Henry getting these kind of services. It's weird,
job sucked, but it was actually highly coveted and well respected, as Grooms of the Stool had access to the king outside of the public eye, allowing for valuable private conversations. Commonly high-ranking nobles or politicians, Grooms of the Stool were known to have influence in many formal rulings, laws, or personal life. So that Anne Boleyn chick's hot, right? No. The first documented Groom of the Stool dates all the way back to 1495 under King Henry VII. The role continued to evolve over the years to the title of Groom of the Stole, though they were more so referred to as either the gentleman or gentlewoman of the bedchamber, depending on the monarch in charge, with responsibilities eventually focusing solely on the king or queen's wardrobe. The position was held for over 400 years until being formally discontinued under King Edward VII in 1901. Well, that's that video. I have plenty more terrible jobs for a part 2. Want me to make it? Leave a comment.
Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you have some critique to give me to make my videos better in the future, leave it down in the comments. I would really appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.